We want to welcome you to the Water Sector Program Grant Implementation webinar for Round 2 recipients. We appreciate you joining us today. My name is Tracy Watts. I'm the Director of the Office of Community Development, Local Government Assistance. So today we're going to be going through the presentation. The presentation is available on our website on the Water Sector Program page. Also, the recording is going to be posted to our YouTube channel, and it will be linked on our website as well. Questions should be entered in the Q&A as the webinar continues on. Please enter your name and email address with your question in case we can't answer the question today and we need to follow up with you at a later date. Also, participants must type their name and system name in the chat box. This is how we will document the attendance for the webinar. If you do not enter this information in the chat box, then we will not be able to document that you were in attendance today. So these are the items we're going to be covering. Where are we now? If you need revisions, the grant conditions that you must meet in order to get your funds released, extensions, labor requirements that apply, getting your permission to bid, how to complete a request for payment, what type of monitoring will we be doing, and the closeout for the project. So where are we now? Awards have been issued. Authorization to incur costs and grant conditions have been issued. You all would have received those letters. And this is a link to our Water Sector Program page on the OCD LGA website. So if you need to access any of the information, it will be there on our website. Revisions. If you need any revisions to the grant agreement, such as your chief executive officer or an address change that has occurred since the applications were submitted, you can notify me and we can send that out to you. This is a list of all of the grant conditions that have to be met in order to get your funds released on these projects. We're going to go through each grant condition individually and explain what needs to be done. Just a couple of important things I want to note before we start going through those grant conditions. Under no circumstances should the grant recipient advertise for bids or begin construction on an activity at this time. We will provide written authorization when you have permission to do those things. We will not release funds until all grant conditions have been met. That means they have to be submitted and some have to be approved by our office in order to be cleared. If we do require revisions, they need to be completed within the deadline that's established in the authorization letter. So please be mindful of that when you're submitting documents to us. We do encourage you to clear your conditions as soon as possible. You don't have to wait 6 months to submit your plans and specs. If you can get them in quicker, that's great. And any extensions to deadlines to clear grant conditions must be approved by the Water Sector Commission. You have to submit a letter to us, and then it has to be considered by the commission. The grant agreement, that's your first item. It is due to our office, signed. Please review the information, identifying your system, make sure that we don't need to make any revisions. The CEO should sign the agreement, and you need to return the hard copy to our office. The authorized signature form due within 2 months. This is the form where you're going to identify persons that will be signing requests for payment forms whenever you get to the point in your grant that you're going to be drawing funds. The instructions for completing the form are on the bottom. You would put the name of the organization, so that would be your system name. On number 2, you would put the subrecipient identification number, which is on your grant agreement. And then in each box, 3, 4, 5, and 6, you can list up to 4 people, 1 in each box. You would type the name, and then that person would sign their name. It's important to note that the signature must match the typed name. So if a person signs their name with a middle initial, then the typed name needs to have a middle initial. It has to match exactly. The date and signature of the certifying officer in number 7, that would be your chief executive officer. So for a municipality, a mayor. For a parish, it would be your parish president. For a system, it would be your board president or your chief executive officer of your system. If someone else is going to be certifying the signatures because your chief executive officer would like to be a person that signs the request for payments, then the form must be accompanied by a resolution of the organization authorizing the certifying officer's signature. The chief executive officer cannot sign in lines 3, 4, 5, and 6, and sign in line 7 as the certifying officer. And the state will sign in the blank 8. We will review it and sign there if we approve it. We must receive this hard copy document. Electronic funds transfer enrollment form due within 2 months. We do encourage all grantees to sign up for electronic funds transfer, but we don't require it. If you're interested in receiving the payments via EFT, then you need to send an email including your vendor number and your federal tax ID number to the address listed here. That is in the division's Office of Statewide Reporting and Accounting Policy. That is the office that will make sure that your account gets set up as an EFT. That is not something that our office can do. The next form is a request for vendor information form. This form and the next form is only needed for systems that do not currently have a vendor number, or that we do not currently have a vendor number for you. So I think that of the awards that we just made, there were only a couple of the systems that will have these 2 items listed in your grant conditions. If you did not have this item listed in your grant conditions, then you don't need to do it. The form is pretty self-explanatory. You put your name and the address, the parish that you're located in, who the contact person is for the system, and who you would like for us to contact if we have information or questions, a phone number, a fax number, an email address, the name of the bank, and the bank account number. And it says on the form that you would complete this form and the W-9, which is the next form we'll look at, and send to our office, and you would email it to janelle.dickey@la.gov, or you can fax it to us to the number that's listed on the form. This is a W-9. Again, you only have to complete this form if it is listed in your grant conditions and submit to our office. The supplemental information page is due within 2 months. You put your grantee name, so your system name, your unique entity identification number that is registered in www.sam.gov. If your account with sam.gov is not up to date or active, you need to make sure that you get that done. We cannot approve any payments to a system or for when you actually bid your projects and hire a contractor. We can't approve payments until those persons or those entities have an active account on sam.gov with a unique entity identified number. You would put your mailing address, your physical address of the system. You would include contact information for the person that is going to be managing the grant for the system. You would list the name of your system operator, and if that operator is certified, what is their ID number. You would indicate if the operator is certified as required, And if the operator is not certified, how and when would that operator earn their certification? The last item is if you're going to be conducting any acquisition of real property for this project, you would need to indicate that on this form. You would say yes. Please note that any real property that is being acquired with the intent of completing this project that includes federal funds, regardless of your funding source of what is paying or actually paying for the property, you must complete your acquisition process in compliance with the Uniform Relocation Assistance and Real Property Acquisition Policies Act of 1970. And you will often hear this referred to as the Uniform Act. We do have a specialist in the office that you can speak with and contact if you need any technical assistance on the Uniform Act process for acquiring property. The financial management questionnaire is due within 2 months. This is the form where you're going to identify persons in your system that are responsible for certain activities in the financial process. We get this document to ensure that there are internal controls in place, or as much as can be possible. And there are things that are required for us since these are federal funds. You would enter your system name and the number of employees that you have. Then you will go through the form and identify who does each step. Remember that you're going to do the authorized signature form that we discussed previously. The names that are on the authorized signature form needs to match who you list on E here, signs request for payment. You have to have a minimum of 2. So remember that you should ensure that who you list on this form for E is the same persons that have signed the authorized signature form. The other thing to note is an H, who signs checks. It does require a minimum of 2 persons, and they must be covered by a bond or fidelity policy. We have to get a copy of that bond and fidelity policy and documentation to show that that policy is currently in place. You're going to attach a copy of that bond or insurance policy and list the persons that are included in that. Our office will review the information, and then once it is approved, we will be able to move forward. The Title VI assurances document is due within 2 months. You would sign this document. There is a couple of items that I want to bring to your attention. Number 3, the recipient agrees to consider the need for language services for LEP, which is limited English proficiency persons, when you develop applicable budgets and conduct programs, services, and activities. And there is a link in the form, www.lep.gov, where you can gain information about LEP and developing a language access plan and what is needed. I also want to point out number 5, that the recipient acknowledges and agrees that it must require any sub-grantees, contractors, subcontractors, successors, transferees, and assignees to comply with the assurances 1 through 4 above, which we've already seen, and that you agree to incorporate the following language in every contract or agreement subject to Title VI and its regulations between the recipient and the recipient's subgrantees, contractors, subcontractors, successors, transferees, and assignees. And then it lists that paragraph. So please make sure that you're including that information in each of your agreements. Lastly, on number 8, it says that the recipient shall maintain a complaint log and inform the Department of Treasury of any complaints of discrimination on the grounds of race, color, or national origin and limited English proficiency covered by Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and implementing regulations. So be sure that you are maintaining this complaint log as needed, and that would be something that would be provided at the end of the grant. So the recipient line, you put the name of the system, then under signature of authorized official would be the signature of the chief executive officer of the system, and then you would date the form. So again, I want to make sure you remember that there's a link in the Title VI document number 3, providing you information on meaningful access for limited English proficiency persons. Remember to include the language from number 5 in any of your agreements and contracts. And remember to maintain the complaint log as required in number 8, and that we will require documentation during the grant closeout process. The performance schedule is due. This is a document that we're going to be used to monitor the progress of the grant. It is due within 2 months. The quarters are indicated on the performance schedule coincide with the 4 quarters of the state fiscal year. The water sector program may have a duration period of up to 3 years, which would be 12 quarters. So the entries on this document should begin with the quarter where the authorization to incur cost date lies and not exceed 3 years from that date. So if, for example, your authorization to incur cost date was February 22nd of 23, then that's when your entries would begin in quarter 3 and not exceed quarter 15. And on the next slide, we're going to view the form and you'll see what I'm talking about. When you're completing the form, each activity needs to be identified as it corresponds to the line item budget in your agreement. For example, a sewer project would involve activities of acquisition, sewer construction, and engineering services. Make sure that you are outlining each of those activities in your performance schedule. Make sure you have identified any major tasks that must be accomplished in order to complete these activities, and list these tasks as milestones under each activity. Be mindful of your grant process that has to be followed when you're drafting your timeline. For instance, if you have 6 months in order to complete your plans and specs, that's marked as a milestone under engineering services, then you would want to make sure that you have given yourself those 6 months, if that's what it entails, to get your plans and specs completed. For each activity, also estimate the projected expenditures by dollar amount for each quarter. The expenditures should reflect all funds, water sector, and other funds that are being used to complete the activity. You need to distinguish between the funds by source and amount. So you would identify any water sector funds that are being any water sector funds that are being expended, as well as any local funds that are being expended. If more space is needed, you should attach additional sheets. I'm going to show you the form, and I want to make one comment as well about the performance schedule itself and when you submit the schedule. If you submit a schedule that does not adhere to the benchmarks or the deadlines that have been identified, and we do not come back to you and request a revision at that time, please do not assume that that is an approval of an extension. Any extensions must be approved by the Water Sector Commission. We provide a status update to the commission every month, and we have to report any non-compliance to the commission. So it's important that you be cognizant of your benchmarks and your deadlines whenever you're completing your performance schedule. And if, as you are mapping out your timeline, you look and see that you don't feel like you're going to be able to meet one of the deadlines, I suggest that you start looking at that early and looking at whether or not you would need an extension. These funds have an expenditure requirement on them. We have to, as a state, have all funds obligated by December of 24 and all funds expended by December of 26. And expended means that the state has drawn the funds and spent the funds and provided them to our grantees. So make sure that when you're drafting your timeline for your project, that you are doing it in a way that you're going to be finished with your project well before that expenditure deadline of December in 26. Plans and specifications are due within 6 months. A copy of your final plans and specifications plus a final cost estimate must be submitted to the Louisiana Department of Health for water projects and the Department of Environmental Quality for wastewater projects within 6 months of the date of your authorization and grant condition letter. Again, I'm going to make sure I want everyone to understand that if you have a potable water project, your plans and specs must be submitted to LDH. And if you have a wastewater project or sewer project, your plans must be submitted to Department of Environmental Quality. This is for us to be able to get a confirmation of your project scope in comparison with your approved application. This does not have anything to do with your permitting for our purposes. If you determine that you do not need a permit, you still have to submit your plans, or we still have to get a confirmation from LDH or DEQ on your scope. We must be notified in writing when you have submitted all of the documents to the cognizant agency and that you've done so within our time period. Remember to include a final cost estimate to our office with that notification. You do not have to submit plans and specs to our office. We will follow up with LDH and DEQ to ensure that all projects approved in the water sector application are included in the final plans and specifications submitted. The rate study is due within 6 months. If any of you have had previously funded projects under water sector, you would know that this process is moving quite slowly because we have a very limited number of firms to work with our grantees. We have been able to hire some firms. We are working with them to assign grantees so that they can complete rate studies and work with our grantees on any actions that are needed. The OCD-LGA, will assign a firm to work with each grantee, and the firm will contact the grantee to begin the process. All grantees are required to participate in this process. If you as a system have completed a rate study on or after July 1 of 21, this document can be reviewed to ensure it meets the water sector program requirements. If you have not completed a rate study after that date, then the firm will work with you to complete a rate study. Grantees that meet all other grant conditions but have been unable to complete a rate study would be able to provide a certification regarding the rate study requirement in order to move forward. We will provide more information to you on that during the implementation process. Basically, you would sign a certification that says you understand that you have to complete a rate study and you have to take any actions that are identified by the completed rate study as needed. And if you do not do so, then any water sector funds that have been expended would have to be returned to the state. An acquisition timeline, also due within 2 months. If the completed supplemental information form that we discussed on an earlier slide indicates a real property will be required through purchase or donation, regardless of the funding source that pays for the property, then you have to follow the Uniform Act. Any acquisition completed with the intent of use on a project that involves federal funds must be in compliance with the Uniform Act. This process does or can be a timely process. So I suggest that if you are going to be involved in an acquisition, that you begin as quickly as possible. An acquisition timeline that includes dates and specific actions that will be taken to complete your process that is identified in the approved application must be submitted to OCD-LGA for review. Ensure that your performance schedule and your acquisition timeline are consistent with each other. It doesn't have to be a fancy narrative. It just needs to list out benchmarks that you will meet throughout your process and the dates that you predict that you will meet those benchmarks. The contractor clearance form due within 2 months is only needed if you're going to be using water sector program funds to pay for professional services. You should have already been notified if you have been approved to use water sector funds for professional services. You would list your system name, your subrecipient number, then you would identify the professional firm that you are requesting clearance for. We have to search the firm to ensure that it has not been a debarred firm, and that way we can use federal funds to pay for the services. Make sure that you get a copy, or you know the unique entity identification number of the firm and that you include it on the form. We do verify this information in sam.gov. The matching funds documentation is due within 2 months. Documentation of your matching funds must identify that the funds are available to be spent. The specific documentation that you submit is dependent upon your source of your matching funds. For instance, if a system is a municipality-owned system and you're using local funds to cover the matching fund cost, then a letter from the mayor identifying that those funds are available to be spent is sufficient. If it is from a system that is a private nonprofit, a letter from the CEO or a resolution from the board that the funds are available to be spent would be sufficient. If you are using any of the loan funds to use as your matching funds, you need to have documentation that the loan has been closed and the funds are available to be spent. If you have any questions about that, you can reach out to us and we can discuss your particular situation. Consolidation documents are due within 2 months. If the approved project involves a consolidation with another system or systems, the executed agreement between the systems that memorializes the consolidation must be submitted to our office. Please remember that a purchase only or a consolidation that does not result in the reduction of the number of PWSID numbers or agency interest numbers is not considered to be a consolidation. So if you received points in the award process for involving a consolidation, you may need to make sure that you are meeting that requirement. Extension requests regarding grant condition deadlines. As I explained previously, all extensions must be approved by the Water Sector Commission. You would send a letter. You can email it to me. My email address will be available at the end of this presentation. You send a letter requesting the extension, explaining why you need the extension and the length of the extension. We always tell grantees that are putting requests or considerations before the Water Sector Commission that you need to have someone present at the commission meetings to answer any questions regarding the request. We do not get very much lead time on notifications for the meetings. We are typically notified a week before the commission meeting. You can go to the Louisiana Legislature's website and sign up to receive notifications of any committee hearings. And that way you will be notified every time the Water Sector Commission schedules a meeting. And you would also get a copy of the agenda so that you know the type of considerations that will be on the agenda for that meeting. The labor requirement, we recommend that you review the U.S. Treasury's compliance and reporting guidance document regarding labor requirements for infrastructure projects. It's on page 27. You can find it by clicking the link that's in our presentation. There are requirements that have to be met for projects whose total expected cost is over $10 million. Make sure that you are including the appropriate requirements in any of your contract documents and that you are communicating those to contractors and subcontractors. Permission to bid will be given to grantees when all grant conditions have been cleared or approved, and LDH DEQ has notified our office that all projects included in the approved water sector application have been included in the plans and specifications submitted for review. We can give approval to bid based on projects. So if your grant involves 6 different projects and you receive an approval or a scope confirmation from LDH or DEQ for 1 or 2 of your projects, and you have met all of your other grant conditions, then we can go ahead and give you permission to bid on those, and not the ones that aren't prepared yet. Grantees that have cleared all grant conditions except the rate study can be issued a permission to bid with the contingency that the grantee may be required to repay all grant funds if actions regarding the rates are not taken as needed. We will provide to you a specific certification that the language must be included on letterhead of your system and then signed and sent back to us if your system would like to move forward with bidding and has met all other grant conditions at that time. Grantees will be required to advertise for bid within 30 days of given permission to bid. If at that time you receive your permission to bid and you do not think that you can meet that 30 days, you can submit a request for an extension. I am allowed to approve extensions for up to 30 days for advertisements for bid. Anything over that must go before the Water Sector Commission. The next form I'm going to show you is the request for payment form. Just a few things before we go through the form. You need to make sure that the signature persons that are signing the request for payment are the same as their signature on the authorized signature card. We have that form here. We compare it side by side to the request for payment form to ensure that signatures are correct. Remember, if they sign with a middle initial on the authorized signature form, they must sign with a middle initial on the form. We have to make sure that those signatures match. You need to sign in blue ink and do not use correction fluid or tape on the form at all. If your project involves funds from the Clean Water Revolving Loan Fund or the Drinking Water Revolving Loan Fund, then we must receive documentation from LDH or DEQ indicating that their program personnel have reviewed the request for payment that is being submitted to us, and payments will not be approved until we do get this documentation. So this is the request for payment form. You put your name, address, and telephone number of your system at the top. You're going to be entering the date of the request for payment. C, you enter the subrecipient number, your federal employer ID number, and your UEI number, which is that unique entity identifier number that you're going to have actively registered in SAM.gov. The next, you would put your request number. Your first request would be number 1. Your second request would be number 2. If you submit a request and for some reason it is voided, let's say your signatures are incorrect, if you submit request number 1 and we void request number 1 for some reason, then the next request submitted will be request 1A. Your actual delivery date is the latest date of any invoices that are included on this request for payment. For instance, if you had 2 invoices and one was dated September 30th and one was dated November 30th, you would put in ADD FY1 November 30th because that would be the latest date. If you have a request for payment and you're requesting services that cross the state fiscal year and the state fiscal year ends June 30th, then you would have information in ADD FY1 and you would have information in ADD FY2. If you don't have costs that are being requested that cross the fiscal year, then you would only have information entered in ADD FY1. Under status of matching funds, you're going to put the amount of match funds that you committed to your project. That is the amount of funds that you committed during the application process. Though that number is what we use to determine your percentage, and that was awarded points during the application process. So it's important that that number is correct. Secondly, amount of match funds expended and documentation previously submitted to OCD LGA. On your request 1, you obviously wouldn't have any match funds documented. But going forward, any match funds that you have documented previously, you would enter there. Amount of match funds remaining to be expended and documented would be you see that it's white, it's not yellow, so it would calculate itself. The fields that are showing as yellow on the form are the fields that you would be completing. And then number 4, amount of match funds expended since the previous submission, and you would attach that documentation. So if you are wanting to document expenditure of match funds, you would attach invoices that you paid, and then you would also attach documentation that shows a canceled check or a bank statement showing a clearance of a check or a documentation of an EFT payment, so that we can show that those funds were actually paid to someone and have cleared the bank. And then number 5 is a calculation that is made in the form. Under section I, status of water sector program funds, you enter your grant amount on number 1, and then you would enter any funds that you have received or requested up until that date, and then 3 subtotals in the form. Under J, you're going to be putting the amount of funds that you're requesting from our office. If you're requesting funds for construction, for sewer, or for water, then you would put it in the line item 1A or 1B, wherever it is applicable. If you are requesting professional service costs for engineering or administration, you would put those costs there. If you are using water sector funds to pay for acquisition, then you would put that there. If you have approval to use water sector funds for any of those costs, it would be identified in your authorization to incur costs or your grant condition letter. If you felt like you did have that in your project and it's not indicated in your letter, please contact me so we can make sure we're all on the same page about that. If you requested a waiver in the application process and you were approved for that waiver and you were not approved to use water sector program funds to pay for professional services, then we would have awarded you state engineering subfunds to cover those costs. That would be indicated in your grant condition letter. If you are an entity that has funds, water sector funds to pay for construction and state engineering subfunds to pay for professional services, then when you request funds for those two types of funds, you must submit separate requests for payments. So on your payments for your engineering fees, that would be the only amount that you would include. Then you would do a separate form for your construction fees under your sewer or water. And you would continue to number the request for payments in a consecutive manner. So it would be the first one submitted would be 1, the second would be 2, 3, and so on and so on. Under K is where you will have the 2 persons sign the request for payment form. Remember that those 2 persons are identified in 2 other places. They're identified on your authorized signature form as well as your financial management questionnaire. Remember that the signatures must match identically. Then under L, which is the section that our office will use when approving, we will review the request. We have a document, an Excel spreadsheet that we use, an invoice tracker that we enter all of the information into, and it calculates based on the approved match percentage and determines what part we can pay with water sector funds and what part would be matching funds. That would be identified under L. We would put the amount of the request, then we would put how much we're going to pay with water sector funds and how much you should pay with your matching funds. On your next draw that you submit to us, if you wanted to document that you've paid those matching funds, you could submit a copy of the canceled check to support that you have paid that, and then we can document that those matching funds have been expended. And then the bottom under L 6, 7, and 8 is just a recap of where you are with your matching funds. Then number 9 and number 10 are signatures by our office, where we will review and then we will approve the request for payments. For your information purposes, when we review and approve requests for payments, then we have to send them to the division's internal audit office for review and approval. And then a payment is requested from GOSEP to be made to the system. Monitoring. Our office will be monitoring the process or the progress of the grant through the program performance schedule in conjunction with your expenditure data. So every time you submit a request for payment, we will look at how your expenditures are progressing in comparison to your performance schedule that you have submitted to us. A labor certification, we may have to review payroll documents if we determine that's necessary to ensure proper wages are paid. But certainly a certification will be included in the closeout process. Documentation of the language access plan regarding limited English proficiency persons may be requested. And grantees must submit a site inspection request form when a project is 75% complete. Remember that if you have multiple projects in your grant, then you would be required to have multiple site inspections. So just remember that you need to have a form submitted for each of your projects. We will schedule the visit and contact the grantee if necessary as we move through the process. So how you request a site inspection is you complete this form and you email it to me. And again, my email address will be at the end of this presentation. You would put the system name, your subrecipient number, a contact person for the system and their phone number, the engineer's name and phone number, the type of project, the percentage that is the construction complete for this project. Then you would include a location of where the work is taking place. If there are any site accessibility issues that would need to be addressed by the person conducting the site inspection, a description of the scope of work that they will be reviewing, and then the signature of the person that is submitting the form, the printed name of this person submitting the form, their title, and the date that you have signed the form. Then we will have someone go out and conduct the site visit. They will put any comments here, and then we will have this file as part of our file. Again, if the OCD-LGA staff member needs to contact anyone with the system or the engineer to conduct the site inspection, they will do so. For the closeout process, a closeout report draft will be provided to grantees prior to project completion. Grantees will be required to submit a complete correct report for final construction payment to be approved by OCD-LGA. And the grantees will be required to have a certified operator of their system on staff prior to closing out the grant with the state. So just a final note, you know, this is being funded with funds that are coming from the U.S. Treasury. It is a new program, and Treasury regularly updates guidance. So if, as we move through this process, any additional program requirements are needed, we will notify the grantees at that time. Here is contact information for myself, for Heather Paul, who is our assistant director. And then we have 3 representatives in our office that are working with Round 2 grants. Gwen Johnson is working with grants for A through D. Suzanne Bentley Smith is working with grants E through N. And Gwen Thomas is working with grants from O to Z. If you have any questions, you can reach out to them and they will try to assist you. This is also some contact information for other specialists that you may need. If you are needing some technical assistance for acquisition regarding the Uniform Act, you can contact Christy Galley, our program manager. Under procurement, Christy Galley is also a specialist on procurement, and as well as Denise McGee, who is a grant representative in our office. So before we move to the next section, are there any questions that we need to address?
We don't have any questions in the chat or Q&A.
Okay, sounds good. All right, so the next section of the webinar, Christy Galley is going to do a procurement section on how to conduct procurement for construction projects.
Good afternoon, everybody. I hope y'all are doing well. Tracy, I did want to say that my email address is wrong in your slide, so I put it in the chat. You know, Christy can be spelled 100 ways. So it's Christy, Kristie, not Y. Okay. So I just put that in the chat for anybody who needs it. So we are going to go into procurement of construction. Did the slide move?
It didn't advance. I can see the screen.
Okay. Did that work?
Yes.
Okay. Note to self, don't use your mouse. So we're going to talk real quick about micro purchase, which frankly in this particular project will probably not be used, but I just wanted to go over it with y'all. So these amounts are less than $10,000. You do not need to go out to bid. You do not need to have multiple quotes. But if you do decide, if there is something that you need to buy that is less than $10,000 and there are multiple people that you could get it from, and you have to go out more than once, please make sure that you don't go to the same person every time. They can be awarded without soliciting competitive quotations, like I said. But just, you know, like I like to say, share the love, if you will. So a small purchase is a simple and informal method to secure services or supplies or other property that do not cost more than $30,000. So for these small purchases, you will need, actually, you do need quotes for this. Typically, we like to say a minimum of 3 quotes, and you award it to the lowest one. And then they could be solicited through a simple description, and it's got to be very concise so that every vendor or potential vendor can submit something that is similar. And, you know, if it's too much, you have to pare it down and say, oh, I need a widget. I want a red widget. And that way you don't get blue widgets. So if you need something more than just a red widget, you're going to need to put in a scope of work, which then negates the small purchase. And then you will have to do, like I said, another procurement method if it's something that is more extensive than just a single kind of object. And you can't break up, if you need green widgets, red widgets, and blue widgets, you can't break them up into 3 different procurements to get below the threshold of $30,000. You're going to have to put them all together and then move forward with the procurement like that, because people will notice that that has been done. So for most of y'all, the procurement method that will be used in this process will be the sealed bids. So this is anything more than $30,000 if you choose not to follow the small purchase procedure and for construction services. So this is used primarily on the basis of cost. So you should have at least 2 or more responsible bidders willing and able to compete effectively for the business. Unfortunately, things right now have led to 1 or no bidders submitting to many of our projects. Hopefully, that will not be the case for these. But if you do have only 1 bidder, please contact me and we will figure that out. So you have to, this is initiated by publishing an advertisement for bids in your journal or your newspaper, your local newspaper. Whereas it is put in your procurement policy, hopefully you have one, that if you're in Shreveport, it's the Shreveport paper. If you're in Baton Rouge, it's the Advocate. You need to be very specific of where you are going to put the advertisement. So you must hold a public bid opening at the time and place that's set in the advertisement. You have to have written review and tabulation bids according to the selection criteria. The contract has to be awarded to the lowest responsive bidder. It is a firm fixed price contract, which we'll go over in a second. And any or all of the bids can be rejected if there's sound documented reason to do so. And the contract detailing a scope of work and the terms of compensation is executed. So a sealed bid method is the preferred method for procuring construction services with a firm fixed price or lump sum or unit price is awarded. The firm fixed price, this contract requires the delivery of products or services at a specified price at the time of the contract award and not subject to any adjustments on the basis of the contractor's cost experience in performing the contract. You know, right now we know that there's a lot of flexibility, if you will, with a lot of prices in construction right now. This will actually, if the contractor says that he can deliver the red widgets for $100,000, but when he goes to order them, they're $105,000. Because of your contract, he's locked into that $100,000. So it lacks flexibility for them, but it's good for you, the grantee. So there's a lump sum price. This is something that is for a deliverable that can be expressed as a single inclusive product. So there's really not much of anything. Maybe if a specific, maybe concrete or something of those along those lines. But it's, again, the contractor agreed to a particular price, and that's what you were paying for it. And you can pay it in one lump sum. You don't have to pay it over time. For unit price, the definable work products or deliverables whose value can be expressed as a single price inclusive of all production costs. So this would be something like labor, materials and purchase services, allowable overhead and profit for contractors. The contractor agrees to bear all risks and cost variance in producing the contract tasks or items agreed upon in the price per unit for the quantity specified. So for fixed price contracts, there are no changes in quantity permitted. So how do you know which method of procurement or contract type and price that you should use? Typically for a small purchase, it's a single payment made upon completion or delivery of performance. To qualify as a small purchase, the total acquisition cost cannot exceed $30,000. If the purchase requires specifications or a detailed scope of work and cannot be simply described, then the sealed bid is the appropriate method. If public advertisement of specifications is required, a sealed bid is also used. The sealed bid method is required for construction services and can also be used for equipment, materials, and some non-professional services. The procurement process must be in accordance with federal requirements of 2 CFR 200.318 to 326 and Louisiana's public bid law. So one of the 3 methods below must be followed when procuring materials and supplies and construction services. So like I said, the micro purchase, the small purchase, or the sealed bid. A bid package includes technical bid specifications. These are usually drawn up by an architect or an engineer on the basis of the prepared plans and specifications and work drawings. These specifications must provide a clear and accurate description of technical requirements for the materials, products, and or services to be provided on the project. Additionally, and this is very important, the plans and specifications must be stamped by an architect or engineer who is registered in the state of Louisiana. If the project falls under the jurisdiction of another state agency, like the Louisiana Department of Health or DEQ, the plans and specifications must also be approved by the cognizant state agency prior to construction. It is recommended that the approval be received prior to the advertisement for bids. Documentation of that approval must be included in the grantee's files. So all public work contracts must contain a clause stating that any punch list item generated during a construction project shall include the cost estimates for the particular items of work the design professional has developed. These estimates are based on the mobilization, labor, material, and equipment costs of correcting each punch list item. The design professional must retain in his or her working papers documentation used to determine the cost of the punch list items should these matters be disputed at a later date. The grantee must not withhold payment in an amount of more than the value of the punch list. The punch list items completed by the contractor and subcontractors must be paid for upon the expiration of the 45-day lien period. The base bid must include all components of the approved project. So public bid law. The advertisement for any contract for public works must be published once a week for 3 different weeks in a newspaper in the locality. And the first advertisement must appear at least 25 days before opening of bids for construction projects. For materials purchases, the advertisement must be published 2 times in a newspaper in the locality, and the first advertisement must appear at least 15 days before the opening of bids. Plans and specifications must be available to bidders on the day of the first advertisement and must be available until 24 hours before the bid opening date. The advertisement must call bidders' attention to the conditions of employment and requirements of federal prevailing wage rates, segregated facilities, Section 3, and equal opportunity. The advertisements cannot be published on Saturdays, Sundays, or a legal holiday. And parishes with a population exceeding 20,000 and a city or municipality with a population exceeding 10,000 must provide a uniform and secure electronic interactive system for the submittal of bids. The public bid law states that if bid documents are amended during the advertisement period, the addendum must be sent to all prospective bidders who have received bid documents. Additionally, it states that no public entity shall issue or cause to be issued any addendum modifying plans and specifications within a period of 72 hours prior to the advertised time for the opening of bids, excluding Saturdays, Sundays, and any legal holidays. If the necessity arises to issue an addendum modifying plans and specifications within the 72-hour period prior to the advertised time for opening of bids, then the opening of bids must be extended for at least 7 days, but not to exceed 21 days, without the requirement of re-advertising for the project. The addendum must state the revised time and date for the opening of bids. A copy of each addendum must be submitted to the Office of Community Development at the time the addendum is issued, including addenda solely pertaining to federal wage weight decisions. All bids received prior to the opening of bids must remain sealed and kept in a safe place until the bid opening. On the date schedule, the public bid opening should be conducted. The bids must be read aloud during the opening, and the apparent low bidder should be determined during the bid opening. However, the bids must also be reviewed for both technical and legal responsiveness of bids. In addition, the bidders must be evaluated as having the capacity to furnish the products and or services required. Pursuant to Louisiana Revised Statute 382227, public entities are required to obtain an attestation regarding past criminal convictions or pleas of guilt, if any, from each bidding entity responding to advertisements for bids for public works contracts. Also pursuant to Louisiana Revised Statute 382212.10, all bidders and contractors performing physical services with public entities must be registered and participate in a status verification system to verify that all employees in the state are legal citizens of the United States or legal aliens. Once everything, the bid opening has happened and you're ready to award the contract, like I said, the contracts must be awarded to the lowest responsible bidder in accordance with Louisiana public bid law. Discretion is given to public entities to determine bidder responsibility. A court decision has concluded that in determining bidder responsibility, the public entity may look to financial ability, skill, integrity, business judgment, experience, reputation, quality of previous work on contracts, and other similar factors bearing on the bidder's ability to successfully perform the contract. If the grantee proposes to disqualify a bidder on the grounds that the bidder is not a responsible bidder, one must give written notice to the proposed disqualification to the bidder and include in the notice all of the reasons for the proposed disqualification. And two, give the bidder the opportunity to be heard at an informal hearing at which the bidder is afforded the opportunity to refute the reasons for the disqualification. Issuing a notice to proceed after execution of the contract documents and notification to the contractors and subcontractors of their responsibilities. A notice to proceed must be issued to each prime contractor. The notice should state the construction start date and the scheduled completion date. Do not submit a copy of the notice to proceed to this office. The contract file and associated compliance files should be reviewed by the grantee to ensure that all documentation is complete. So the following is a list of construction contract file requirements. One would be the preliminary design and cost estimates. Then the final design documents and cost estimates. Evidence that all necessary land or easement acquisition has been completed prior to the advertising of bids, if that's necessary. Bid documents, documentation of submittal to and approval of plans and specifications by the cognizant state or federal agency having jurisdiction over the project. So that would be DEQ for sewer and LDH for water. Certification of compliance with Architectural Barriers Act, if applicable. Proof of publication and a copy of the advertisements for bids. The minutes of the public bid opening, and then the tabulation of bids. So this is also stuff that needs to be put in the file. Recommendation for award, the notice of the contract award, the executed contract document, certification of insurance and bonding, the notice to proceed, the documentation verifying the prime contractor and all subcontractors have an active UEI number, and evidence of a project sign. So the grantee is responsible for monitoring the construction of the water sector project to ensure that the contractor is operating in compliance with the technical specifications and state and federal requirements, maintaining adequate cost and budget controls, and processing the necessary contract changes in order to bring the contract to completion. Upon receiving the notice to proceed, a contractor must submit a cost breakdown showing the amount assigned to each portion of the work. This breakdown must be reviewed by the grantee and its engineer or architect and used as the basis for requests for payments. The breakdown should be submitted to the grantee within 5 to 10 days of the receipt of the notice to proceed. The construction management must include inspection and general supervision of construction to check the contractor's work for compliance with the drawings and specifications in quantity and quality control. And written inspection reports must accompany the contractor's requests for partial payment to the grantee. In accordance with Louisiana Revised Statute 382248, a maximum of 10% retainage on construction contracts which are less than $500,000 and a maximum of 5% retainage on construction contracts which are $500,000 or more can be retained by the grantee. When the construction work has been completed, the contractor must certify completion of work and submit a final request for payment. The architect and engineer, or engineer, depending upon what you have in your project, must make the final inspection and prepare a written report of the inspection prior to issuance of the final payment, less retainage. So the procurement staff in our office is myself, Christy Galley, and then Denise McGee and William Hall. Are there any questions?
You don't have any in the chat or the Q&A.
Wow. Okay. I'm trying to.
All right, well, if we don't have any questions, I think we can wrap it up. Again, we are here if you need us. These presentations will be posted on our website, and we look forward to working with you throughout the grant process. Y'all have a good day.